Hello once again for joining us here for another episode of Data Strategy Unraveled here on the AWS Data and AI YouTube channel. My name is Jason Young. I'll be the host today for this episode, particularly around the trends that we're seeing with the retail side of the organization. So I have two guests here today who are very esteemed in this domain, which is Ingo from B.Telligent and also John here at Amazon Web Services. But let's give yourselves a bit of time to introduce yourselves.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me. I'm Ingo. I'm a management consultant at B.Telligent. At B.Telligent, we are a data consultancy, mainly working in the DACH area, so German-speaking part of Europe, and Switzerland, of course. So I've been working in the retail domain for quite a while, helping retailers to gain value from their data, and I'm glad to be here and talk to you.
And I'm John. I'm a senior solutions architect working for AWS, predominantly with German customers, and I've had the privilege of working with a vast array of customers. I come from a traditional background of software engineering, but then moved to architecture and tech leadership. And since I joined AWS, I've been interested into how do I join these worlds of like software engineering, building backend services to the analytics services. And that's what made me focus on the data journeys of multiple customers, find out what is the right data strategies that customers are applying, and what are the things that work and doesn't work.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us. And I think, as you mentioned, John, the key part of today is to really talk about maybe one of the key industries, that globally all customers are interested in, which is in retail. Retail is one of those things where, people interact with almost day in, day out, whether or not they're buying things at a supermarket or if they are shopping online. And I'd be really interested to find out, what's the trends? What's the current environment of retail right now, particularly in Germany? Are we finding that, it's very much the same as what we've been experiencing 10 years ago? Are we moving to a new age of retail? John, what's your thoughts?
So in general, of course, everything has been rapidly evolving over the years. And it has mostly three pillars where customers in retail have been focusing on. It's first, differentiating customer propositions, where it's not just retail, but almost every service out there or service provider is trying to find a differentiating way to present their service and their products to their customers, and so that they can interact with those products and services in innovative ways. The other part is, of course, the marketplace and the operations behind the marketplace. So everything that's happening behind the scenes after the customers are interacting with the services, and once they push this, I want to acquire the service or I want to buy this product button. And lastly, it would be expansion, because as every business have realized that expansion and this agile scalability is something that's the key capability or key skill that they need to have. And that's something that we're starting to see a lot with retailers in Germany.
Okay. And Ingo, retail, is something that you specialize in and B.Telligent. Have you seen a similar shift in terms of, John mentioned, around expansion, but also personalization? What's examples that you can see?
Definitely. So, like John mentioned, you want to be attractive for your customers, but to do that, you have to know your customers. So you want to know what the customers do on your website, on your shop, what products are they looking for, what products do they buy in the end, where are they coming from? All those questions need to be answered. And what we've seen there is a trend to do that better is to get more control over the data that you produce, using first-party cookie solutions for the tracking and really getting the nitty-gritty of the data into your platform right away and not be dependent on getting some aggregates from some other service provider, but really having the full control to then analyze the data and make the most of it.
Yeah. And one thing that you just kind of, was talking about is around first-party cookies. As we already know, online, there's a deprecation of cookies. So in order for you to track what a customer is doing, where they're coming from, is a little bit harder. So, has that fundamentally changed the way in which, organizations need to start thinking about how they look at customer insights? So you talked a lot about understanding what a customer is doing when you're on the website. But what other kind of attributes of data do organizations in retail need to think about when they want to understand the customer a bit better? Ingo?
Right. I think the tracking alone the first-party cookie solutions, the data they bring is one part of the picture. But like you mentioned, what comes after? That is usually not tracked in those systems. So you need connected insights, what we can call them, getting the data together from various systems, like the shop, the ERP system that might be behind it, the supply chain systems that give you information about the deliveries, actually where the customer is coming from in terms of marketing, and then getting those information together to create a 360 view of what the customer is doing, and not just looking at one part of the whole story.
Yeah. Are you seeing a similar trend, John, in terms of like unifying data?
Of course, in general, like unifying data is something that, or it has been a trend that consolidation towards strategic data assets is a trend that's going forward right now, not just with retailers, but with everyone. But around your question with cookies, like of course, compliance and transparency has put a lot of changes in how customers are, or how retailers are looking at their customers' data, collecting customer data, retaining those data, and then processing that data. Also, it goes with the GDPR and EU Responsibility Act for AI. Those kind of things have put a lot of constraints and a lot of governance has to be put in place into the data strategies of retailers, because they are predominantly working with customer-facing digital services and customer-facing interactions.
And it's what's important is that, as you said, like because there is AI not just on the horizon but already here, there's a bit of a fear maybe for retail organizations of understanding what data they can and can't use. Obviously, you have consent of data, marketing data that you need to capture, so that way you're not using it for the wrong purposes. But as you said, there's a lot of data out there that could be perceived as personally identifiable information that retailers may already be using, and there's almost like a protection that they need to think about. So let's talk a little bit about that. So, AI obviously, being one of the things that most organizations are really investing in. Does AI fundamentally change the game in terms of how retailers respond to what customers need? Or is it just more of the same, but customers expect it, therefore you just need to put AI in? I mean, what's your thoughts, John?
Yeah, so maybe at some point in time, like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something, AI was maybe a gimmick, but right now it's a reality. Of course, we started to move from personalization to hyper-personalization trends, because not just the attention span of customers, but also the ways that right now they're interacting with retailers, those attention spans and the amount of results that they're getting out of those digital experiences is getting less and less. And those has to be focused. They have to be very relevant to what the customer wants to see, even if they do not mention that intent right away. It's something that inherently you need to discover and find out from the customer interactions before, and also from other channels that you can get from the customer. Again, in this like constrained and governed way. And that's why this consolidation moves that we've seen into those strategic assets and strategic data sets allows customer to put a lot of their effort and governance into those assets, rather than trying to chase around all those like data silos everywhere and try to enforce those governance and how you use the data all over the place.
Yeah. And I think Ingo, we were talking about before the recording of the episode that there was a few interesting examples in terms of retailers that you're working with, B.Telligent, that is looking at how to reinvent the customer experience. But I guess like retailers, obviously market their products in particular types of, customer cohorts. So there was, an example you gave in terms of, a luxury brand that you're working for, or a luxury retailer. How are they adopting kind of new age data and new age AI to really attract and delight their customer base?
Yes, Jason. I mentioned one of our customers, Teresa, who just recently did a move towards more first-party cookie strategy to have the control, to also then really, in their way, create the customer journey in a more concise way, in a more precise way, let's put it that way, but always by connecting the data. Not just working in silos, because that's always one side of the story, and a campaign that might look very successful, just looking at the clicks and at even the conversions might, in the end, when you look at the returns, and what really was left over after a certain period of time not as successful anymore. So that is basically what they do to try to get the bigger picture and not focus on just one silo and maybe falsely falling into the trap of seeing success where in the end there isn't one.
Yeah, and what's important is that when you're thinking about, like you talked about connected insights, on this channel we always talk about like what data you have, which is first party data, but there's also a lot of external data. You mentioned, previously that, organizations are thinking about like trends, right? Retail, as you can see in this background, is all about like understanding what's out there in terms of trends. What's trendy out there in the market that customers love to buy, because those trends are going to ebb and flow. They're going to disappear. So organizations need to really understand what is the tip of what everyone wants to get in terms of the spear before the trend then dies down. So let's talk about that kind of external social media data and, how do you take that through for a retailer to utilize? I mean, John, do we have, any, good practices that we can think about around how to take what is out there in external data or trends or social media that, retailers who are tuned in on the channel today could actually, practically take?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting kind of problem because you always want to be relevant for your customer. And the thing is, a lot of people have different strategy for doing that. Some retailers would do that by expanding their inventory to huge amounts. And that's something that we see with fast fashion. And reiterating on like styles just to be able to cope up with those number of trends. But others have also found out some different ways. Like, for example, looking at social media trends or looking at blog posts or what your customers are saying or doing if you have a social component to your retail website. These are things that need some kind of a deeper understanding, and the traditional recommendation systems might not be the suitable thing for these kind of things because fashion is inherently subjective and ambiguous in nature. And that's something where we can like use generative AI, for example, to start to understand what are the core components of certain things that customers are commenting on or sharing among each other. And with that, you can then understand like trends that are happening as they are happening right now, right? Based on that, you can even like go further with your recommendation journey.
Yeah, and I think what goes down that line is the anecdote of, you have to have those must-have products maybe in your category. And how do you find out which those are? Might be, monitoring the social media, seeing what is hip, and then monitoring actually, does that drive traffic onto my shop? Because I'm one of the points where you can get this. But then you have to look closely, is that what actually brings me the revenue? Because there are enough products which, drove the customers onto your site, but then that isn't what the customer bought. And I think that's what you have to understand, that some of the products you might just have to have in stock because that's what people expect you to have, but that's not necessarily what you have to have in huge quantities because it's not what the people in the end buy.
And maybe one additional example to that, when customers like go to a trend or see a trend, they try to take whatever that they saw in a trend and then go to your digital experience and search for something. But they don't use the trend terms. They actually try to search for what they have seen. An example is that, let's say that there is a trend about, dressing like a Halloween clown. You were not going to, and that trend might have a specific hashtag attached to it. But when you take your search to a digital experience, you don't write the hashtag in the search bar. What you rather write is, I want a Halloween costume, or I want a clown costume, or something like that. Well, based on that, you need to connect back to the trend and understand that maybe that's not really about Halloween clown costumes or something like that, but rather maybe wearing a specific type of t-shirts or jeans in a certain way, and then presenting that to the customer.
Yeah, and actually that's really important because if you think about retail, there's obviously different modes of retail. You have in-store, you also have online, particularly online, the last 20 years, particularly digitalization on, how you are able to buy things online. The search experience is critical. And traditionally, the search experience is based on keywords. but you don't search based on keywords now. In most of the time, if you think about fast fashion, it's based on the trend that you see on short form video, whether or not it's YouTube Shorts or TikTok. So actually, it's either the hashtag or some sort of relevance of what someone is doing as a dance is going to be, well, I want to buy the items of the person who is dancing. But there's no relevance between the person dancing and the items there. So you almost need to convert like trend and the words of the trend to actually what you have in your inventory. So, how are we seeing organizations take the search experience? Like, is generative AI the answer to searching for things easier? Or do you think that there needs to be a lot more of a kind of a more targeted focus? So as you can say, if you search for something and you lead customers astray and they buy it and they don't like it, that's going to create a negative experience. So how do you pair back like relevancy of, search results to what the customers want? I mean, Ingo, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think with the Gen AI movement, there are whole new possibilities because you can distill basically information out of what you see in those videos and what's written, which maybe before you couldn't really map because there was no algorithm for it, or it would have been very, very complicated. So I think those new tools that we have will be really helpful there.
And John, it's the same?
I want to go back to Ingo's point about like connecting what you see in trends and your inventory, because sometimes we just take all the generative AI experience and just say, this is just about like matching looks or something like that. But rather, if you have a data strategies that allows you to put some kind of strategic assets and say, I have some things that's going to connect what I see as trends and what I have as inventory items, and maybe look at the trends closely and identify an anatomy of those items of a garment, for example, for fashion, or the items of products that people are using to create a certain trend, and then provide those like constituents of those items and connect that back to the metadata of your inventory. Now you can build a scoring system and a better recommendation system that takes into account what you're seeing in social media trends. And that's kind of an experimental thing that we're seeing with right now retailers in Germany that they're trying out. But the key thing here is that you're connecting your inventory, as you mentioned, with the stuff that people are seeing in trends. And based on that, you better find for your customer the right products based on the minimal amount of things that they provide in the search experience. And in the future, it's going to be very different shopping experiences online.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because a lot of that data, the metadata on what the inventory says, is probably on, a ERP system, or an enterprise resource planning system. One of the big ones in Europe is SAP, and there's other ones that are available. And we've talked about, we want to free up the data. We want to get that data from ERP systems, and we want to scan that. But I suspect that that's only one side of the equation, because if people are searching for trends and you don't have the inventory, it doesn't mean that you stop there, but particularly when you think about retailing and in fast fashion, there's a bit of a corporate social responsibility around not, just selling things for the sake of it, because it will end up being landfill, right? So there's a sustainability element that we need to think about. So, John, have you seen retailers taking more of a kind of stance around that element of sustainability? Have you seen that sustainability is a big thing in retail, particularly in fast fashion?
Yeah. Definitely. Like recyclable fashion and all these trends are heavily affecting a lot of the retailers. And as you mentioned, it's a multi-optimization or a multi-function optimization problem where you're trying to optimize against a lot of things. Of course, you want to optimize for your profitability and the discoverability of your inventory, but you're also looking forward for sustainability and the carbon footprint every product is bringing, and also fulfilling those orders and services to your customer. It's something that takes a lot of thought, but the good thing is that we have the means. And as you mentioned, freeing up the data from multiple sources and putting this data together, as you connect multiple data sources together, now you can approach this problem with a scientific manner or engineering manner to start to look at what are the kind of things that you can bring from the wider context of data, not just fulfilling an item, but also what are the additional things behind the operations of that item, so that you can provide an informed decision to your customers.
And Ingo, sustainability is one thing in, how to think beyond just the experience itself. But what other measures of success have you, been told by organizations that they care about that isn't just about the customer? What other things are retailers thinking about on their minds to be able to think about what does success look like for them?
Right. Especially in fashion, like I mentioned, return rates are definitely a topic. And we know that, or maybe from personal experience, I'm not sure which size to buy. So I buy both, buy 2 or 3 and try them on and send them back. That's not really sustainable. So I think what you see more is the retailers trying to advise you what would be the right size for you. And that can be also solved with analytics in terms of looking at purchase and return history, what brand and which size fits to other sizes and other brands, and then you get recommendations like, oh, this shoe from a certain brand is rather small, so buy it a size bigger, which you cannot know about all the products, I think, just from the product descriptions, but that is something you also can learn from the behavior of your customers. So that is one part, or one approach how data can help actually on the sustainability front.
And one of the things, obviously we represent Amazon Web Services here, but also Amazon.com. And Amazon.com, arguably as the world's biggest marketplace, has been looking at how to look at their data to really enhance the customer experience. And one of the things that we did 4 years ago when generative AI started to become, a really big angle to differentiate is looking at the pool of data that we have in customer reviews. So customer reviews was one of the areas where you have so much unstructured data, but there's a lot of complaints, like you said, like people will be buying things and complaining, saying that's the wrong size. So we, looked at our first use cases is how do we then provide, size optimization? How do we provide that recommendation? One of the things that I'd be interested to think about is that, okay, so customer reviews is one area that retailers probably have a lot of data on. But what's another untapped area of data that you think actually retailers should start thinking about to differentiate their experience end to end? And John, is there any kind of forefront of new data domain that you've been hearing that actually it really adds that incremental value?
So the most interesting thing is, of course, using generative AI again to build those metadata feature stores about everything that you're finding from your product. Not just from a product description perspective or not just from an images perspective, but also from additional data sources, like, for example, manufacturer information or supplier information. Then you can go back to the retailer and the operations. All these kind of things, you can collect multiple unstructured data about your products and understand more about what the customer behavior and reaction is going to be. So building those knowledge domain or domain-specific knowledge feature stores around your products is something that I'm seeing that is very different about how you use your data today and how you extract your data from your products, from structured data and from unstructured data. Because one part or something that's untapped is that structured data by itself, like, for example, customer behavior logs or clickstream data, is maybe valuable to understand as a single record or a single behavior, maybe in an aggregation over a session, but over multiple sessions, you can also start to understand a profile for a customer. And that's something that I've also seen retailers try to make that in a token fashion and feed that to a transformer model and try to tell the transformer model, you know what, this is your language now. What can you predict about the customer behavior? And then they can start to put out new tokens or new customer behaviors. And you can now look at multiple trajectories and look at the ones that you would want to customize or you want to optimize for, and then see along those ways what can kind of intervention methods that you can do in order to pave the road for those outcomes.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about one of the key metrics in retail as being what we call customer lifetime value, or CLT. And I think one of the things that I'd be interested to understand, Ingo, is that when you talk with customers around what is customer lifetime value, right, stretched over different sessions, do you see that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to be able to advise customers on this is one definition of customer lifetime value, go and implement it? Or do you think actually with all these different technologies and all these different data domains that have yet to be untapped, that actually the definition of lifetime value is very different?
Well, I think first the difficulty is to really calculate or understand what is the lifetime value of a customer. It starts with the business model of the retailer. What is a good customer? If I sell, let's say, fast fashion, I want maybe the customer to come often to buy. But if I sell high-quality products like a bike, I'm not going to expect the customer to show up every month to buy another bike. So the question of what's a good customer is a totally different. Time horizons become different. So first, what you have to understand is what is my business model? What would a good customer look like for me? And then you have to, like we talked before, not only connect data from various sources to really get a feel for what the actual value is of the customer instead of just looking at silos, but you also have to not only over various sessions, but also over various channels to identify what is my customer, so that you can really start creating that customer journey, that user journey, to understand where are they coming from, how much did I pay maybe for getting the customer to my site. Was it an influencer that I paid that drove traffic to my shop, if you're talking about online retailers, or was it that ad campaign that I ran? You're trying to find over various channels where the customer is coming from, and you might not identify right away what customer actually came, but over time you might through the sessions. So that whole domain of getting the data together, identifying the customers, then basically building segments out of them to understand them better, that is an approach that you have to really embrace. And I think there's not really one size fits all, but I think there's a methodology, a way of doing that is quite well understood and that we can work on with the customers.
And I think retail is probably one of the few areas that almost lives and dies by channel attribution. That retailers spend so much money in upfront marketing, whether or not it's with SEO or whether or not it's with advertising, that actually it has historically been very well defined in terms of the metrics of success of an advertising campaign is X and Y. But actually, if you kind of take the answer that you just mentioned at face value, if the lifetime value definition changes, then actually you need to be very robust as an organization to change the metric definition, but also match it to your advertising spend. And I think that's the problem is that there's one problem, which is unifying the data, but actually then telling a story around the business value is critical, because if it doesn't add any incremental value to the business, then no matter what you invest in technology, it's going to be redundant. So, I mean, John, you've been working with a lot of customers around that subject, around how to monetize the value of data, how to bring business value to all the kind of the investments in technology. Is there a few customer examples that you can kind of talk to around that?
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, we have a lot of referenceable customers in Germany, but the ones that I've been predominantly working with is Zalando, and Zalando is very data-driven. Recently, in the AWS Summit Hamburg, they presented their customer insights portal, which is something that they use to build a customer journey from the user behavior data and the user behavior analytics, and then make that data available to be connected to multiple data sources. And that's where they found the real value of the data. How can they build some kind of a strategic asset that talks about the customer journey end to end, but then goes beyond the customer journey from the digital front-end behavior analytics that you capture to different kind of things. And measuring the impact of that is always a challenge, because it feels sometimes that you're building a platform without having a direct connection to the use cases, to the business units that are using those strategic assets, and knowing exactly who are your internal customers for those data assets. This data value becomes something that's very tricky But for data-driven customers, this kind of labeling of how the data is being used is something that they are very keen on and they're very rigorous on. And I've seen that not just across Zalando, but a lot of other data-driven customers in Germany.
Ingo, you're seeing a very similar shift in terms of, organizations that are looking at value one way to actually having data inform them, being more data-driven in terms of how they want to operate as a unit?
If I understand your question right, yes, we see that, especially also in terms of campaign optimizations, those kind of topics, where you use the learnings you get out of that connected insight about that strategic data asset to then drive your outreach, to reach the right people at the right time, but then always having in mind and designing in the feedback loop to then being able to measure, at least in the digital world, that's very relevant, measure the success of what you have been doing. Do I really reach the right crowd? Does it lift up the conversions and the ROI of that campaign? Does it really is going in the direction that I wanted to? And I think that is what's the beauty of e-commerce and online retail and so on, that they have the means of measuring a lot of those things if they put it in from the beginning and thinking of it from a data-driven way, not just from a marketing way. I'm pushing my message out there, but also right away, how do I connect it back and how do I then use the data that I collect over all the systems to optimize the whole system to basically gain value.
And actually, the way in which kind of, we look at the world right now, as you said, organizations are moving away from being reactive to a trend to being proactive. In fact, I can imagine some retailers in Germany are probably creating new markets. Like they're not just looking at their existing inventory to match a trend, but they actually create the trend themselves, right? So, how does AI help to create trends? So if you think about AI, obviously, is the generative AI angle, but now you've got agentic AI, which is, where you can have fully autonomous agents, create decisions and outcomes. Are we finding retailers using these autonomous agents to almost create new value, create new opportunities? And then if that is the case, then are retailers also thinking about how do they replace the human workforce as well, which is obviously one of the, very careful considerations organizations are going through. But at the same time, as we've established today, AI is already here, right? So I think retailers have to adapt or die. That's how they feel. But how does it then impact the traditional retailer who's been working there for 20, 30 years, who understands those trends? And now you're saying, well, AI is going to replace it. Like, how are retailers now looking at the organizational mindset of technology change versus how do we bring people to adapt to that technology? I mean, John, what's your thoughts around that?
So I'm going to first address the first part of the question of how retailers are creating new markets. For fashion, a very important mechanism of creating new markets and addressing multiple segments of customers is storytelling. And for example, Zalando has this thing that's trend spotter. And this is something to create those stories about mega trends or micro trends as well in fashion for different customer segments. Now, the way they do that is that behind the scenes, there is multiple workflows. It's not just agentic predominantly, but on multiple layers, they are using different kind of techniques in order to create those agents, to create those trends. But the thing is, or the things that now goes across not just Zalando, but all kind of retailers that want to do something similar, is that what we have seen is that they've built on a strong data strategy or a data foundation first. Now, from there, you can examine multiple layers of how you can use generative AI in different ways. Like, for example, to accelerate developer productivity and accelerate also your workflows with agentic workflows. That's internally. Now, externally as well, you can use generative AI to generate some of the content for you or create for you some kind of storylines that also accelerates the internal workforce or the creative workforce that is going to build those stories. Now, what we have seen is that generative AI has been an accelerator mostly for the productivity, not replacing humans or something like that, but rather making sure that instead of staring, for example, for 6 hours at a blank page, you can have a starting point by just talking to an assistant that would help you at least lay out a foundation for your thoughts. And then from there, you can accelerate your creative process and build more trend-spotter issues, for example, for Zalando. But other than that, of course, there are now different channels where retailers are interacting with their customers, and different channels where they're providing their services. Like, as you mentioned, with agentic flows. But that would be something that we can dive deeper into in another part of the question, but I would give it to Ingo as well.
Yes, thanks. Something very similar, I think, the gain of productivity, where before maybe in marketing, it took a long time to get the message right, to create the content of marketing messages and so on. Now, with the new technology, that can go all faster. Yeah. Doesn't mean that I need less people, but it could also mean that I can address a wider segment because I can target the message to certain segments and make it tailored and have just a lot more different campaigns than I was able to push out there before. So I think that is one of the examples where AI helps. And then also, first understand what kind of markets do I want to address, understanding then basically how does that, for example, that segment talk? How do I have to address them? And then using something like Gen AI to produce the content that fits exactly their target group. And I think that is a good example also how technology now enables retailers to act differently, to become more productive without slashing the workforce, but actually making more out of what they have.
Yeah, and the other use case that we hear a lot on this channel around agentic is around customer service, right? So if you think about chatbots, it's moved from being very simple in terms of its decision to actually helping the customer to get to that final result. And one of the good examples is that Amazon has invested heavily around agentic workflows to ensure that the customer service, if you're complaining about something, it will then automatically, get to the remediation, which is either a refund or to send something back, a replacement item. But I think agentic AI also is a bit of a fearful area for retail, because if you get it wrong, and if you are making a transaction that the customer doesn't want, then that is going to be really bad in terms of the reputational risk that the organization has. So particularly for retailers in Germany, do you think that there is that progressive view of adapting to like a new way of making a transaction, and therefore agentic AI is the way forward? Or actually are you seeing that there are certain things that organizations, particularly in Germany, need to think about before first, almost like work backwards before they start to get to that kind of decision making? I mean, John, what's your thoughts?
So particularly because of this compliance and how thoughtful German customers are, they are looking at the multiple layers of things that they have to do before they can put any content in front of customers, especially with the Responsible AI Act. So a lot of those things about guardrails and things that you have to make sure that you're not, for example, putting some kind of biased content or content that's discussing any topics that you would not want to discuss in a customer-facing manner with your assistants or agents. That's something that they're thinking a lot about. And the good news is, again, you can have agentic workflows to help accelerate this journey for you. So you can start using LLMs to look for those kind of signs of where you're going sideways with a conversation with a customer, and put guardrails around how AI is being used for and with your customers. Now, the other aspect of having this thoughtfulness is it comes again backwards to the multiple layers of things that you have to build. And one of the important things is that in order to understand the guardrail, you need to understand first what was a right process, what was a right workflows that has been executed multiple times with your customers, consider as a positive interaction. And that comes again from your data strategy and your data foundation. You have to have this kind of thing, because I've had an interesting conversation with a customer a couple of days ago where they mentioned that we realize now that if we just put agents on top of everything, it doesn't just work. It is not going to provide the values that we're expecting, because there is a lot of things that we have to build around. And they started now to understand that building thoughtful contexts for those agents and deep context for those agents is a thing that's going to enable those agents to accelerate your work, but in a safe way and in a desired way.
Yeah, and I suspect, not every single customer for a retailer wants to go through that experience. So there's not like a one size fits all of, even if you get it right, and there's a thoughtfulness to that agent that every customer wants to experience that. Some people still want to go in store. We've talked a lot about the online shopping experience, but in store is still absolutely critical, right? People still want to have that comfort of being able to talk to someone in front of them. So, Ingo, what's your thoughts around the balance, in retail around technology and AI versus, really working backwards against what the customer is? Like, what's B.Telligent kind of doing around kind of that subject?
Basically, that working backwards is really sitting together with the customer, understanding what do you need, what is that use case, what is that you're looking for that will take you further, and then start to build from there. Seeing what do I need to get you to that vision, to get you to that extra value, and build out the systems, or see what do you have in-house that we might have to repurpose, or like you said, you had the silo, we have to bring that silo in to that strategic data asset, that customer data platform, whatever you want to call it maybe, to then fulfill that vision of what they want to do. And like I said, that is that working backwards methodology of understanding really what the end customer, or in this case the retailer maybe needs, to get to that point he wants to go to.
And I suspect one of the key things that you just said is around understanding the customer, but also understanding the use cases themselves. So what would be, some of the recommendations, John, that you can make around how to identify the use cases? Is it simple as going through all the other videos that we've recorded today and then finding the best use case and then copy pasting? Or actually, do you think that there are certain things that you need to think about around what use cases mean for a retailer before they start moving forward?
So there is a balance that you have to strike between exploration and exploitation. There are some use cases that are going to work very well for you, and you want to accelerate those. That's the exploitation part. But right now, there is a new horizons that opened up, and you really need to experiment to find what is the things that's going to tick and differentiate you as your customer. Because as I mentioned, there is one important thing, and it's not just about retail, it's about everything, where you as a service provider would want your customers now to start to play around and test your service or maybe your product as a retailer before they even get their hands on the thing. For example, with AWS, you have AWS Party Rock. And it tries to tell you what is going to look like if you're going to, build some kind of an application that does some kind of weird objective, whatever that is, with generative AI. And that goes further for the developer experience. And with Kiro, for example, there is this kind of experimentation where you can now do spec-driven development and go from just a vision or an idea or PRFAQ to some kind of a demo or a showcase in a matter of minutes or not weeks. And that's a kind of thing where I see that experimentation is very important. One thing that we also do with our customers is that we can work with them shoulder by shoulder into hackathons and generative AI hackathons, where we bring to them some resources and some solution architects and experiment with multiple use cases within their domain and try to find out what is the things that ticks. Because right now it's very easy to go from concept to some kind of a demo or a visualized showcase and start to think early on, is this something that's going to move the needle for me or not?
And I think that's really interesting, what you talked about around like experimentation, exploitation. Retail is one of those areas where if you can even differentiate a little bit, it makes a lot of value. But it's also being able to be very targeted around where do you want to experiment, what type of customer cohort, what type of segment that you want. And what AI is able to do is that you're able to launch things at speed. But you could argue that an AI agent can also pretend to be the customer and then provide that feedback. So not only are you launching something in a very small fashion, but if you don't have that target audience, you could actually create an agent that is prompted to be like that customer segment. And that actually will be some guiding kind of feedback on what you need to do. So actually there's almost like a pre-experimental stage that you could tackle before you go to true experimentation with the direct customer and then move on from there. So, we're at the end of the episode. I guess this is where we have the kind of the practical next steps that you could advise, those who are dialed in today around what do they need to think about if they were working in retail, that they could talk to their manager the next day around where are the low-hanging fruit opportunities. So I'll give, John, you the floor in terms of what would be, a 1-minute kind of recommendation pitch that you could mention to our viewers that they need to take on, and then Ingo, you next. John?
So we have now a realization that the way that we're doing retail is changing. And it's not changing in the medium term, it's really changing right now as we're speaking. So the things that I would tell everyone is that you don't have to put agents everywhere. Like if you have that pressing mandate, it's going to create some kind of a headless chicken situation within your organization. But you have to also experiment and find the right way to experiment in a use case basis and work backwards from a use case. So try to maybe experiment first on multiple concepts and try to use generative AI to accelerate for you those concept generation ideas. And then from there, try to find maybe a cluster of those ideas or maybe a specific use case, and then put some kind of a business value target around that and look at your team and tell them, hey, bring someone from the AWS account team because I want to experiment on that use case and see what is the value going forward with that use case. And that would be the things that I would tell every customer out there that is doing something, especially with AWS.
Well, I'm sold on that, that process, John. But I mean, Ingo, over to you. What would be your recommendations to the viewers today?
Yes, I totally can second that thought about finding the use case, not trying to do all at once. That is also our experience. That works very well. But to have in mind always to build that solid foundation. Not do the use cases in little silos and then they're standing there and they don't work with the rest of your platform. So I think what we also like to do is always look at the foundation, at your data strategy. Do you have the right tools in the right platforms? Do I collect the data in a way that I can actually do those experimentations? But concentrate first on use cases and do basically those end-to-end solutions, but always with the bigger goal in mind of that I'm building out a solid data foundation that then I can reuse for the next use case that comes. So what also in AWS terms, the data flywheel does. You start with something small, but you always have that thinking big philosophy in your mind and build on use case by use case to really get to that data foundation and gain value by value, but with less efforts because you can build on the efforts you spent before.
Yeah, I cannot give enough thumbs up for that.
So there you have it. In terms of retail, there's obviously themes that you need to think about around sustainability, around being able to build out a solid data foundation, but also being able to experiment at speed, but having a very clear mind on what success measures are. So thanks a lot for your time today, for coming into the London headquarters of Amazon to kind of go through, what are the great trends that we're seeing in retail for John and also Ingo. And for those at home, if you look at the links below, you'll be able to be directed on how you can find out for more help from Amazon Web Services and also from our trusted partners here at B.Telligent. So thanks a lot.